Imagine that you take a vacation and book a beautiful hotel with a stunning view. You spend 2 wonderful days at the beach, enjoying the water and relaxing. When you finally go to sleep on the comfortable bed, you suddenly hear a terrifying voice telling you to wake up and clean the boat. You rub your eyes to make sure it's not a nightmare, but you discover that you have been kidnapped on a dirty boat full of insects and rodents, and you're in the middle of the sea. After you recover from the shock and try to understand what is happening, you realize that the kidnapping you have experienced is 100% legal. Hello, I'm Davies. But before we begin, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can receive our videos as soon as they're uploaded. Before the invention of air travel or even paved roads for buses, long distances were traveled by sea. Ships were the primary means of travel and trade. After the Industrial Revolution that took place in the late 18th century, the shipbuilding industry multiplied and thrived beyond what it was before. With the increasing desire to obtain raw materials or sell new products and inventions, the seas became crowded with ships whose numbers increased many times over. The result of this maritime transportation movement was the emergence of several world-famous ports on every continent around the world, and in almost every coastal country. At present, some of the most important global ports outside of Europe are the Port of Shanghai in Asia and the Port of Portland on the west coast of the United States. Both of these ports are the protagonists of our story today. The Port of Portland is located in the western United States, which was known to be one of the most dangerous places in the world at that time. Murder was easier than a pinprick, and the strong did not even bother to hide their crimes. There was no fear of the law, which was practically non-existent. Initially, ship captains didn't need to advertise to find sailors to work with them. Everyone wished to find an opportunity to work on a ship. The salaries were rewarding, and the incentives were satisfactory. However, people realized that working at sea was a tremendously difficult task. The labor force began to decline, and the shortage of sailors was becoming evident. The job most affected by this shortage was the cleaning and maintenance job, which made the boats very dirty and turned them into colonies for rats and insects. Even when ship captains started using incentives and raising salaries to attract more sailors, there was still a shortage of sailors in most ships. Those who agreed to work on a ship and embark on a long journey would swear not to experience this again, even if it meant death. Besides the inhumane living conditions with insects and rats, the work on the ship was extremely difficult and dangerous under the circumstances of the sea and the changing weather. Moreover, the vast majority of voyages didn't have a fixed end date, and it wasn't uncommon for a trip estimated to take a month from Portland to Shanghai to turn into a secondary voyage after the captain decided to make some trips in Europe or Africa before returning. The problem was that no sailor could complain or express their exhaustion. The presence on the ship turned the person into a slave with no decision-making power. The ship's captain was like a king or a president, and they were not subject to any international law, except for the maritime law, which was issued in 1915. However, even this exception wasn't present at the time our story takes place. Moreover, as we mentioned earlier, even the laws on land in the western United States were practically non-existent, which gave the captains almost absolute power during the period between the 16th century and the beginning of the 20th century. If a person's foot stepped on a ship for any reason, that person would be bound to the orders of the country's king, who was the ship's captain, and their fate would be determined in that country. Indeed, the picture became clear that the ships faced a shortage of sailors, but at the same time, the ships could not do without them. They had to find a solution in any way possible, and if raising salaries didn't yield results, violence became the solution. Specialized gangs began to appear, kidnapping people and selling them to ships. Once the kidnapped person boards the ship, they become subservient to the ship, and the ship captain becomes their king. This specific practice was the reason behind the emergence of the term crimping, which was coined by the maritime gangs during that time. Another term that was more popular than crimping was the term Shanghaiing. Shanghai was a famous Chinese city and one of the most important ports at that time, and since most of the kidnapped people were sold to ships going to Shanghai, the term Shanghai became synonymous with kidnapping. In fact, some dictionaries still have the verb to Shanghai meaning to kidnap. The issue of kidnapping and Shanghaiing became so widespread that gangs began to devise different methods, including soft kidnapping by drugging or luring victims through prostitutes, and violent kidnapping where victims were forcibly taken and sold to ships. These practices were so prevalent that they even inspired Charlie Chaplin to make a movie about them called Shanghai. These practices were not even considered criminal until 1915. After the Industrial Revolution, kidnapping became a more difficult process than before. Security conditions improved, and people became more cautious. As a result, most kidnappings occurred to homeless people living on the streets. The sailors who were kidnapped were often in poor health or had limited education and skills. Ships required sailors with expertise in different fields, so they needed to think outside the box and come up with new ways to recruit sailors. One of the most famous problem solvers during this time was Joseph Bunko Kelly, an Englishman originally from the city of Portland, Oregon. He was one of the most famous kidnappers, and his prices were also very competitive. The price for one person was $52, which, after adjusting for inflation, is around $1,250 in today's prices. Of course, this is a great price compared to the current prices for many things. Joseph Bunko came up with the idea of establishing a luxurious hotel directly on the beach with excellent prices and 100% services. The hotel was so attractive that no one could refuse it, whether they were looking to relax or spend a couple of days at the beach. As soon as guests arrived at the hotel, the victims or even groups of victims were selected, knowing that no one would ask about them. The hotel's prices were cheap, and the staff did not scrutinize the guests' identification documents, so anyone could stay there. Over a period of 15 years, about 2,000 victims were abducted for the ships. At one point, 50 victims were reported in a single day. The hotel continued to operate normally without anyone discovering the truth about its crimes. Nobody knew about the crimes until Bunko himself confessed to them. Although Joseph Bunko was eventually imprisoned, his imprisonment had nothing to do with the hotel or kidnapping operations. Instead, he was imprisoned for murdering a drug dealer he had worked with. Of course, drugs were the excellent weapons he used to control the kidnapped victims. During his 13-year prison sentence, Joseph Bunko attempted to repent for his actions and disassociate himself from his past. He wrote a book about his life, in which he talked about everything. Today, the book is considered one of the books that historians rely on to describe crimes at sea. However, it seems that the book did not receive the success that encouraged Bunko to continue writing, and it is said that he returned to the kidnapping business after his release from prison. However, after his release from prison, no one heard about him again, and the activities of the crimping and shanghaiing operations disappeared completely with the improvement of ships and the tightening of government security measures, as well as the emergence of new types of transportation. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, please leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to give us a like before you go, and we'll see you in the next episode.